Have you ever accomplished something and still felt like a fraud? You smiled, nodded, accepted the praise, but inside, something cracked. A silence, a whisper. You're still not enough. This voice doesn't scream. It doesn't insult. It waits for the quiet, for the stillness, for that moment just before you speak your truth. And then it leans in with a whisper so sharp it cuts. Don't say that. They won't understand you. Stay agreeable, stay safe. You begin to realize that this isn't just insecurity. It's an echo of something older, deeper. This section is for the ones who perform strength in public, but collapse inward when the lights go out. For the ones who've become masters at hiding their slow erosion, who learned how to be liked but forgot how to be real. The German philosopher Nietzsche once said, "We listen most to the voice that no longer needs to shout, and sometimes that voice is not your own. It's inherited, conditioned, implanted." The guilt of being too much, the shame of needing more, the learned silence of someone who was taught to shrink. But what if I told you, the voice that cracks you from the inside was never yours to begin with? What if the doubt you carried is a script you've been cast in, not a truth you've chosen? The question is not whether you hear the whisper, it's whether you keep obeying it. Whose voice is that? When you hesitate, the one that tells you to stay quiet, to stay small, to not disturb the peace with your truth. You think it's your own, but what if it isn't? What if the critic in your mind isn't a voice of reason, but a ghost? A leftover frequency from childhood, echoes of rooms where love was conditional, where silence was survival, where being good meant being invisible. You didn't choose to doubt yourself. You were trained to. Each time you swallowed your pain to keep the peace, each time you were praised for selflessness that cost you your soul. A new rule was etched into your nervous system. Don't feel too much. Don't want too much. Don't be too much. This is borrowed shame, a fear that doesn't belong to you but lives inside you, and over time it got clever. It put on masks, called itself humility, dressed itself as kindness, posed as obedience, but underneath it all was control. Psychologists call this the introjected voice, the voice of others internalized as your own, a survival mechanism. Once protective, now a cage. Carl Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." So ask yourself, that hesitation you feel, is it really your intuition or is it inherited fear, borrowed shame, and a life that was never truly yours? What if you've never actually met yourself? Not the mask, not the polite voice, not the well-adjusted fiction you've been performing. I mean you, the unfiltered, untamed presence that was buried before it ever breathed. From a young age, you were told who to be by what you were not allowed to become. Too loud? Calm down. Too curious? Don't ask that. Too confident? Don't be arrogant. And slowly, piece by piece, your true self became a threat, while your false self became a shield. This wasn't discipline. It was emotional. Suppression disguised as love. And over time, it fractured your identity. Nietzsche called it the will to power, the deep, instinctual drive not just to survive, but to become, to grow, expand, create. But in a world that feared your magnitude, your will to power was muted, labeled selfish, dangerous, inappropriate. So instead of becoming, you adapted. And that mirror, the one that could have shown you who you are, was turned to the wall. All you've known is a reflection crafted by avoidance, an identity born of suppression, not expression. You think you're timid. You think you lack confidence. But what you really lack is permission, not from the world, from yourself, because no one ever taught you how to look in the mirror without guilt. The question now is, are you finally ready to turn the mirror back around? You were never weak. You were made to feel that way, so others could feel safe. What? If your self-doubt was moralized, what if being unsure, agreeable, self-effacing wasn't your nature but your training? Nietzsche called this slave morality, a system where the powerless redefine strength as evil and obedience as virtue, where confidence becomes arrogance and self-trust becomes sin. And slowly, you were taught that humility meant hiding, that goodness meant shrinking, that being liked mattered more than being whole. You weren't living, yet you were surviving. Adapting to a world that punishes truth and praises silence, your ability to be invisible was rewarded, not your power, not your clarity, not your will. The world gave you applause for staying in your place, so you stayed, and called it morality, called it humility, called it being a good person. But beneath that costume of goodness was a constant ache, not for recognition, but for permission to stop kneeling. Because that wasn't humility, that was suppression, with a halo on top. Slave morality turns doubt into virtue and authenticity into rebellion. It's why speaking up feels dangerous, why wanting more feels wrong, why trusting yourself feels like betrayal. But you're not betraying anyone, you're returning to yourself. And here's the hard truth. You were never meant to be a humble slave. You were meant to become something else entirely, something dangerous to the systems that silenced you. Close your eyes. Go back before the world hardened you, before you learned to smile through discomfort, before your silence became your safety. There was a moment, a small, almost forgettable one, but it changed everything. Maybe you were too honest, too loud, too emotional, and someone you needed, winced, scolded, pulled away, so you made a choice. Not out of weakness, but out of instinct. You silenced yourself to stay close. You buried your truth to feel loved. You betrayed what you felt to avoid being left behind. That was the first fracture. The first time your behavior split from your truth. Psychologists call it adaptive self-betrayal. It's what children do when the cost of authenticity is abandonment. It was never your fault. It was survival. But here's the thing about survival. It doesn't care about your future, only your safety. And so the fracture grew. You became an expert at reading the room, at saying the right thing, at being what others needed, while your real self waited in the dark. That wasn't cowardice. That was genius adaptation. But now, what once protected you is what's suffocating you. Every time you hesitate to speak, every time you doubt what you feel, you're reliving that first betrayal. Not because you want to, but because your nervous system still thinks it's saving you, but you're not that child anymore. And maybe it's time to stop abandoning yourself just to belong. What if who you think you are is just a survival pattern you mistook for a self? Not your soul, not your essence. Just a clever mask stitched together by fear, rewarded by approval, and mistaken for identity. You say you're an overthinker, that you're indecisive, that you struggle with confidence. But what if none of that is true? What if doubt, repeated long enough, becomes a habit, then a defense, then a personality? This is how the lie cements. It doesn't shout, it settles in. And before you know it, you're living from it. The over-analyzer, the people-pleaser, the one who second-guesses everything, especially yourself. But those aren't flaws. They're responses. Trauma wearing the costume of character. You weren't born indecisive, you were just punished for choosing yourself. You weren't born lazy, you were just never allowed to want without being shamed for your desire. You weren't born full of doubt. You were taught to outsource your worth to anyone but you, and now you call that self, but it's not you, it's a reflex. An emotional scar that got misdiagnosed as identity. Carl Jung warned us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life, and you will call it fate. So look closely. That personality you wear like skin, is it really you, or is it just the safest version of you that could survive the environment that raised you? What would happen if just once you didn't apologize for existing? No softening your tone, no shrinking your presence, no waiting for permission that will never come, just one moment, one breath, where you choose yourself without negotiation. Can you imagine it? Because this is the inflection point, where the lie begins to loosen, where the noise in your head begins to lose its grip, where doubt, for once, has nothing to feed on. It doesn't have to be loud. You don't need to scream, post or prove. Sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is not explain yourself. You say no, and don't follow it with a justification. You take space and don't fill it with guilt. You sit in your own silence and let it echo with authority, not absence. This is the beginning of sovereignty. Agency doesn't mean dominating others. It means returning to your own center, to act because it's true for you, not because it keeps others comfortable. Even choosing stillness, even walking away, even simply pausing, can be an act of defiance against every system that taught you to abandon yourself. In that moment, when your choices begin to come from you and not from fear, you're not just reclaiming your voice. You're remembering that you were never lost, only waiting to be chosen by the one person who matters most, you. There is a fire inside you, a force Nietzsche called the will to power. But don't misunderstand, this isn't about overpowering others. It's not about control or conquest, it's about mastery, not of the world around you, but of the self within. The will to power is the primal drive to become, to shape yourself beyond the versions others have allowed, to create your own essence from the rawness inside. When desire becomes sacred again, doubt begins to dissolve. Because confidence doesn't roar, it doesn't shout, it simply is. True confidence is the quiet certainty of someone who knows, whatever I become, it is mine. Not borrowed from approval, not borrowed from expectation. It is my becoming, fluid and alive, free from the chains of judgment. This is where the internal shift begins, from fragile approval seeking, from the shaky ground of self-doubt, to a sovereign becoming. You don't need to know all the answers. You don't need to have it all figured out. You need only to trust the process, the fire burning inside, the will to power that pulls you forward. Nietzsche believed that to become your own Übermensch, your highest self, is to embrace this relentless transformation. So ask yourself, will you choose to fuel that fire? Or will you let doubt keep you frozen in a shadow of who you might be, because the power to become is already yours? What if silence isn't emptiness? What if silence is the loudest proclamation of your power? When you stop trying to prove yourself, when you stop defending, explaining, over-explaining, something shifts, the noise around you fades, and in that quiet, you begin to feel yourself, not the version shaped by doubt or approval, but the one who simply is. This is sovereignty. The quiet command that requires no applause, no validation, no permission. You don't convince, you emanate. Your presence doesn't beg to be seen. It simply is. Complete, unshakable, whole. Nietzsche said, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe." Sovereignty is that struggle won, not with words but with stillness. And in this stillness, doubt doesn't die with a scream. It dies softly, like a candle snuffed by a calm breath. It dissolves in the peace of knowing your worth doesn't require explanation. The less you seek permission, the more you feel peace. This silence is not absence. It's presence. The presence of someone who no longer negotiates their existence, who knows that true power is felt, not forced. So, when you hesitate next, ask yourself, are you speaking to prove you exist? Or are you simply being? Because sovereignty lives in the silence between words, and in that silence you are free. Boundaries are not walls. They are declarations, visible signs of self-trust. When you set a boundary, you're saying, this is who I am. This is what I will accept. This is where my energy begins and ends. For too long, doubt told you boundaries were selfish, that saying no was rude, that protecting your time or feelings made you less than. But here's the truth. Every time you say no to what drains you, you say yes to who you are becoming. Boundaries don't isolate you, they anchor you. They create space for growth, healing, and power. Psychologically, limits are essential. They teach your mind and body that you matter, that your needs are valid. They quiet the inner chaos caused by overextension, constant people-pleasing, and invisible emotional debts. Saying less, doing less, showing up less, especially in the wrong places, builds confidence like nothing else. Because each boundary you honor becomes a a small but fierce act of sovereignty, growing into a forest where doubt cannot take root. When you begin to act on your inner convictions, even in tiny moments, you prove to yourself that your voice matters. Your presence matters. Your truth matters. And this is where doubt begins to crumble. Because belief isn't just a thought, it's an action. And boundaries are belief made visible. You were raised to be liked, to please, to explain yourself until others felt comfortable. But what if that was the problem? What if your power has been chained to the need for approval, for understanding, for being seen exactly as you want? Doubt clings hardest when your worth depends on someone else's interpretation. What if strength isn't found in being understood? What if real power lives in being unapologetically misunderstood? There's freedom in letting go of the need to perform your value, to justify your existence, to constantly explain who you are, why you feel, what you want, because when you stop performing, when you stop shrinking to fit their lens, doubt has nowhere left to hide. You don't owe anyone clarity. You don't owe anyone peace of mind. Your essence is not a puzzle meant to be solved by others. This is liberation, to stand tall, to speak, to be, without needing a stamp of approval. You become a force that doesn't ask permission, a presence that doesn't seek validation, a soul that doesn't bargain for acceptance, and in that space your doubt dissolves. Because the need to be understood was never a requirement for your power. You are powerful simply by being. There is a death you must face, not of the body but of the self you thought you were. The overthinker, the appeaser, the avoider. This is their eulogy. For too long they carried your weight, cracked under the pressure of doubt, cloaked in hesitation, whispering lies about your worth. But Nietzsche taught us about the eternal recurrence, the terrifying question: if you had to live this life, this version of yourself over and over forever, would you? Would you choose to replay these patterns? Would you carry this self with all its chains, again and again? If the answer is no, then it is time for the old you to die. This death is not painless, it demands mourning. It asks for grief for the comfort of old habits, for the safety of familiar doubts. But it is necessary, because transformation cannot grow in a soil of yesterday's self. When that outdated version dissolves, doubt begins to fade. You clear space for a new self, one not built on fear, but on becoming. This death is a surrender, a letting go, a promise that you will no longer live from fragments and shadows, and in that surrender, you find the seed of rebirth. The old you must die so the you waiting beneath the rubble can rise. Imagine waking up, and the heavy cloak of guilt no longer drapes your shoulders. The whisper of doubt, once a constant companion, has fallen silent. This is the moment of rebirth, the phoenix rising from ashes of self-betrayal. The unapologetic self is not cruel, it is not loud or demanding. It is clear, steady, unshakable. This is emotional confidence, not arrogance, but a grounded knowing that does not need to prove itself. You don't argue with your truth anymore. You don't negotiate it or dilute it. You simply embody it. Presence becomes your power. Not the need to be right, liked, or understood, but the deep alignment between who you are and how you show up. Doubt retreats in the face of this quiet force. Self-alignment. It's the internal harmony where desires, values, and actions meet. No longer a battlefield of conflicting voices, but a sanctuary of clear intention. This unapologetic self holds space for all your complexities, not as flaws, but as facets of your unique being. You are no longer fractured or afraid. You are whole, and in this wholeness doubt becomes irrelevant, not because it's defeated, but because it no longer belongs to you. You are simply unapologetically you. Power is not what you do, it's what you are. Not a role you play, but a frequency you radiate. Doubt is performative. It's the mask worn to appease, to fit in, to avoid rejection. But power hums quietly beneath the surface, a steady vibration of self-possession. When you shift into emotional sovereignty, everything changes. Your relationships no longer drain you, they reflect you. Your posture straightens, not to impress, but because you feel your worth. Your silence no longer screams insecurity, it echoes calm certainty. You stop asking, "Am I enough?" because you already know you are. Instead, you ask, "Is this aligned?" This question becomes your compass. A filter for every choice, every word, every moment. You begin to recalibrate your life around that inner resonance, letting go of what feels off-key, tuning into what vibrates with your true self. Self-doubt becomes static on a forgotten station. Noise you no longer bother to tune into. Power is the frequency of presence, not the performance of approval. It's a state you carry, not a show you put on. And once you feel it, you realize, power was never outside you. It was always waiting, quiet, unwavering inside. Doubt never truly disappears. It lingers like a shadow in the corners of your mind, especially when the light fades, when you step into the unknown. This is the final war. Not a battle with others, but an internal clash, a moment of raw confrontation with the voice that once owned you. It tempts you, whispers old lies, offering safety in familiar chains. But this time, you come armed. You carry a sword forged in self-awareness, sharp with truth tempered by experience. You know its tricks and the silent attacks, the false promises, the paralyzing fear. And you don't run, you stand, alone, in the dark, and you choose yourself. No spotlight, no crowd cheering your name, just a quiet, fierce decision. I will not betray who I am. This choice changes everything, because it is fully yours, not given, not borrowed, not dependent on others. You become the sovereign of your own. So holding power not because it's easy, but because you choose it anyway. In this dark moment, doubt loses its grip, not because it's gone, but because you no longer belong to it. You belong to yourself, and that is the fiercest victory of all. Look closely. You were never broken, not shattered, not flawed, only buried, beneath layers of programming, pain, and silence. Self-doubt was never your enemy. It was a signal, an alarm bell ringing softly, telling you that your soul was being stifled, that your true self was trapped beneath expectations and fear. You were not wrong. You were restrained. The weight you carried wasn't yours to bear. It was handed down, stitched into the fabric of your history and culture. But now you stand at the edge of something sacred, the reclamation of your inner authority. When you claim that power, doubt no longer has a place. Not because the world around you changes, but because you do. You stop asking for permission. You stop shrinking to make others comfortable. You stop trying to fix what was never broken. Instead, you honor what you buried. You unearth the self. You hid away, the spark that never died. And in that unearthing there is reverence, not rage, not bitterness, but a profound respect for the resilience you never knew you had. You were never lost, only hidden. And now, you are finally free.